Before the bombs, the table. An Iranian Genesis by Elias Winter, March 20th, 2026. Read by an automated voice. They set the table while the city shook. Not because the city was safe. Not because the planes had turned back or the prisons had opened or the dead had been restored to their names. They set it because the year was turning, because spring had arrived according to a law older than the Republic, older than the clerics, older than the sanctions, older than the states now discussing Iran as though it were a file and not a civilization. In the Tehran apartment, the grandmother arranged the Haft-Seen with the concentration of a woman not decorating but repairing. The sabzeh leaned toward the window. The apples were polished until they held the room in miniature. Garlic in its white quiet, vinegar in glass, sumac, dark red, Samanu sweet and dense, as if wheat itself had learned endurance. At the center, the mirror stood upright, waiting to return a face to itself. Outside, a siren rose and broke against the apartment blocks. Inside, the grandmother adjusted the hyacinth and told the child not to touch the candles. The girl sat cross-legged on the carpet and watched with the solemn curiosity children reserve for adults who seem to know something about how the world is put together. She had already learned enough to be afraid of sounds. She knew the difference between the crack of celebration and the crack that sent parents reaching for phones. She knew that power could come from above and from within, and that both could call themselves necessary. The grandmother placed the mirror at the center of the table. "Why are we doing this?" the girl asked. "If everything is breaking?" The old woman looked up. Her face had the calm severity of someone who had survived enough history to stop mistaking panic for thought. "Because," she said, "a people that forgets the new day has already agreed to die." The girl frowned, not because she disagreed, but because children know when they have been given an answer too large for the question they asked. Outside, another sound, distant this time, something between thunder and metal. The grandmother sat beside the table and drew the child closer. "Listen to me," she said. "There are governments, there are armies, there are men who think the world begins when they speak and ends when they strike the table. Let them think it. Iran was old when their grandfathers were still dust." The child touched the edge of the mirror. "Did Iran begin at Nowruz?" The grandmother smiled. "No, Nowruz is how Iran remembers that beginnings do not happen only once." The parents had not yet returned. The mother was with a sick aunt. The father had gone in search of fuel or bread or news, which in a city under pressure begin to resemble one another. The grandmother had been left with the child and the table and the turning of the year. For most of history, this has been enough. An elder, a child, a room, and a story wide enough to hold a nation until morning. The child leaned against her shoulder. "How was the world made?" she asked. And because in that house, as in so many houses before it, the question of creation did not belong first to theologians or rulers, but to grandmothers and frightened children, the old woman began. "Before there was a world," she said, "there was not nothing." Adults say nothing because they like clean beginnings, but the old stories are wiser. Before there were mountains and markets and apricot trees and little girls asking questions, there was order. Not written, not spoken, not carved into stone. More like the reason light knows how to be light, and water how to be water, and spring how to return when winter has done its worst. "In Persian," the grandmother said, "we have words for this. In older worlds, our ancestors had other words, but they all pointed toward the same thing. Truth, order, the way things are meant to stand." "At first," she said, "there was no king in the sky making lists. There was no judge building the world like a clerk building an office. There was order. There was form waiting to appear. Sky rose into place. Earth settled beneath it. Waters found their limits. Fire was placed among created things not to consume them, but to reveal them. The child's eyes widened. So, fire is alive? The grandmother laughed softly. Everything is alive if you listen long enough. But fire is special. Fire tells the truth. Fire does not let dirt pretend to be clean. Outside the window, evening had gone gray, then metallic. Somewhere in the building, a faucet coughed. Somewhere down the street, people shouted, then stopped. The grandmother continued. When the world was made, it was beautiful, but it was not finished. That is the first thing foolish people never understand. They think creation means completion. But the old Iranian wisdom knew better. A garden can be planted and still need tending. A child can be born and still need teaching. A country can have a history and still lose itself. So who finishes it? No one, she said. Or everyone. She touched the sabzeh. The world was made so that living beings could choose whether to help truth stand or help falsehood spread. That is why speech matters. That is why promises matter. A lie is not just a wrong sentence. It is a small betrayal of reality. And every spring, she said, the world is given another chance. That is no ruse, not a party, not a costume, not an excuse for photographs while the city burns. It is the day the world says again, I am willing to live. The girl stared into the mirror, where the candles doubled themselves. Does that mean the world can die? The grandmother took a breath. It can be made ugly. It can be made cruel. It can be made forgetful. But as long as someone remembers the order beneath the ruin, it can begin again. The child was silent for a while. Then she asked the question that turns cosmology into history. Where did we come from? The grandmother leaned back. From far away and very close. That is not an answer. It is the only true one. She did not point to a map. Maps come late and always lie a little. Long before Iran was called Iran, she said. Before Persia was called Persia. Before kings built stone stairs for ambassadors to climb, there were people under very wide skies. Horse people, fire people, song people. They moved with their animals. They measured time in frost and thaw, in pasture and return. They did not carry the world in books. They carried it in memory. The child imagined them at once. Riders under a hard sky, women tying bundles, children on carts, old people watching the horizon. They had priests, the grandmother said. But not like later priests. They had singers, keepers of old words. They had warriors, because beauty does not protect itself. They looked at the world and saw pattern. They saw that spring returns, but never without winter first collecting its due. They learned that the world is lawful and fragile. Were they Iranian? Not yet. They were the ancestors of many peoples. Some would go west, some would go toward India. Some came into this land and joined themselves to it so deeply that after a while, you could no longer tell where Rider ended and Plateau began. The child traced an invisible route in the air. So we came from somewhere else. We all do, the grandmother said. Only idiots and tyrants believe purity is a history. Every real civilization is made of meetings. Then she told her how those old peoples came into lands where others already lived. Not empty lands, never empty. There were farmers there, builders, keepers of grain and water, people who had already learned how to coax life out of difficult soil. And did they fight? The child asked. Sometimes, of course. But fighting is never the whole story, no matter what men and textbooks prefer. They mixed, they married, they borrowed, they changed one another. The people of pasture met the people of field. The keepers of fire met the keepers of grain. And over time, something new took shape. She paused. Iran. Not yet a state, not yet a border. Something older and less fragile than those. It was a way of holding the world. Truth not as opinion, but as structure. Spring not as weather, but as instruction. Human beings as answerable for whether the world remained fit to live in. Did they celebrate Nowruz then? The child asked. Not as we do now. They had spring rites, they had old joys, but Nowruz became itself later when many streams met. The riders brought the sense of cosmic order. The settled peoples brought calendars and the patient intelligence of agriculture. Over time, the new day became what it is. Not only spring, but renewal. Not only survival, but the refusal to surrender. The girl looked again at the table. Is that why it has so many things? Yes, said the grandmother, because a civilization hides best in ordinary objects. The candles flickered. Somewhere down the block, a generator coughed to life and died again. The child asked, Did we always believe the same things? No people does. She turned the apple until its red side faced the child. There was an old Iranian religion before Islam, before the Arabs. In that older religion, the world was understood as a struggle between truth and the lie, order and its corruption. Fire mattered, light mattered, purity mattered, speech mattered. To lie was not merely to be incorrect. It was to collaborate with disorder. Then Islam came. Yes? Did everything change? Everything changes. Not everything disappears. The grandmother's face hardened slightly. The Arabs came with a book, with revelation, with empire. Their faith was different from the older Iranian way, which felt the world through renewal and balance. But conquest is not the same as erasure. Iran became Muslim. Iran did not stop being Iran. How? By remembering, by keeping the new day, by carrying older light inside newer words, by letting poetry protect what power could not fully command. She tapped the mirror. The world likes simple stories. Before and after, conqueror and conquered, believer and unbeliever. Civilizations survive by becoming too deep for those stories. Outside, a dull concussion moved through the air. This time, the building felt it. Dust trembled loose somewhere in the corridor. The child startled. The grandmother kept her hand on the girl's shoulder until her breathing slowed. Then the old woman looked toward the darkened window and said what had been there all along. Do you see why this matters? The child looked up. The men who rule us now would like you to believe Iran is their sermon made into a country. The men who bomb us would like the world to believe Iran is their target made into a morality play. Elsewhere, they will sort us into categories tidy enough for briefings and panel discussions. Fine, let them. That is how distant power speaks when it wishes to avoid saying human beings. She gestured toward the table. But none of them begin where a civilization begins. Not with missiles, not with ministries, not with clerics, not even with kings. It begins in what a grandmother can still tell a child while the city shakes. Can they destroy it? The grandmother answered without haste. They can destroy bodies. They can destroy buildings. They can make a people poor, afraid, humiliated. They can fill prisons and cemeteries. But the thing they can never fully own is the oldest story a people tells about what the world is and why it is worth keeping alive. The child leaned into her. Then why are you afraid? The grandmother laughed once, softly. Because I am not stupid. Then she kissed the top of the girl's head. Fear is not disbelief. Courage is not the absence of fear. The old Iranian inheritance was never optimism. It was fidelity. Tell the truth. Tend the fire. Keep the promise. Mark the spring. Refuse the lie even when the lie is armed. The room entered a temporary stillness. In war, stillness is never peace. It is only the pause in which people count what still remains. The grandmother rose. I have to go out. The child's face tightened. Why? We need bread, she said. And maybe rice, maybe eggs, maybe candles, maybe nothing. But I have to look. Don't go. The old woman crouched before her. Listen to me. Your mother and father will be back soon. Stay here. Don't open the door for anyone but them. If the power goes out, the matches are in the second drawer. Don't move the mirror. Why not? The grandmother smiled. Because the year is watching itself enter. The child almost smiled back. The old woman adjusted her scarf, looked once more at the table, then at the girl, and left with the shopping bag folded beneath her coat. The door closed. For a while, there was only waiting. Children know how to survive waiting. They turn memory into shelter. The girl repeated the story to herself in order. First the law in things, then light, then sky and earth, then fire, then the people under the wide grasslands, then the coming into Iran, then the mixing, then the old religion, then Islam, then poetry, then the new day, then the grandmother coming back with bread. This is how children keep the world from breaking. Then came the sound, not the clean sound of cinema. A blast is filthier than metaphor. Pressure, metal, fracture, the conversion of ordinary space into event. The windows shuddered. One candle fell sideways and went out. The mirror tilted but did not break. The child froze. Then the street began to shout. Later, many minutes, or very few, in danger time becomes atmospheric. There were footsteps on the stairs, then keys, then the door opening and her parents entering with faces that had already become the answer. The mother saw the child first and gathered her up with a violence born of relief. The father looked toward the window, then toward the table, then at the missing grandmother-shaped space in the room. No one said it immediately. Adults imagine silence protects children. It does not. It only gives grief time to take its seat. Where is Maman Bozorg? The child asked. The mother closed her eyes. There had been a strike near the shops. The bakery damaged, the pharmacy gone. Bodies, or pieces of bodies, or no bodies that could be named quickly enough. Someone had seen an old woman with a shopping bag. Someone else had not. In war, disappearance often arrives before death is acknowledged. They packed in haste. Documents, water, clothes, medicine. The father covered the mirror with a dish towel and then uncovered it again, as if ashamed. The mother wanted to leave the table. The child would not let her. In the end, they took only one thing. A small apple, red and cold, and absurd in its intactness. They left the apartment. On the stairs, the child looked back once. One candle lit, one dark. The sabzeh faintly green in the failing light. The mirror holding the room that no longer held them. She wanted, suddenly and absolutely, for the grandmother to appear from the corridor laughing at their panic, bread under her arm, rebuking them for leaving the year unattended. She did not. In the car, or the borrowed van, or the crowded hush of other fleeing families, the child held the apple in both hands as if it contained instructions. The adults spoke in fragments. Roads, checkpoints, fuel, relatives, battery, where the strike had landed, whether more would come. These are the practical liturgies of a collapsing order. The child heard almost none of it. She was busy keeping the story from breaking. This is what states, regimes, and empires never fully understand. They think power is the ability to command bodies, control speech, occupy territory, dominate airspace, administer fear. Often it is, but civilization has another grammar. Civilization survives in transmissibility, in whether the oldest truth a people knows can still be handed, intact enough, from the mouth of an elder into the mind of a child before the blast arrives. The grandmother did not return. That is the private sentence around which the public century arranges its hypocrisies. She was not a combatant. She was not a strategist. She was not a centrifuge, a faction, or a target package. She was a woman going out for bread under a sky crowded with the machinery of men who speak in abstractions and kill in neighborhoods. But she had done what she needed to do. She had told the child that the world does not begin with rulers. She had told her that truth is not opinion but alignment. She had told her that Iran is not identical with the government that imprisons it, nor with the enemies that bomb it, nor with the foreign commentariat that mistakes analysis for witness. She had told her that the new day is not optimism. It is defiance disciplined by memory. And because she had told her, the story crossed the blast. That is how civilizations survive. Not unscarred, not pure, not untouched by conquest, theology, compromise, corruption, modernity, exile, or grief. They survive because something older than politics remains speakable. Because the child can carry what the building could not. Because the table, even abandoned, has already done its work. Somewhere on the road out of Tehran, dawn would have begun its indifferent kindness, the horizon reddening before the sun fully rose. Sumac in the sky. A new day arriving over a city that had not consented to its own disfigurement. The adults would look at the light and think of danger, visibility, next steps. The child, holding the apple, would think of the story. Before there were bombs, there was a table. Before there was a regime, there was a spring. Before there was ideology, there was the law in things. And as long as even one child can still be taught that the world is made not only once, but whenever truth is chosen against the lie, Iran remains older than its ruin and younger than its grief. That is what the grandmother knew. That is why she set the apples in order while the city shook. That is why she went out for bread. That is why she does not return. And that is why, still, the year does. Elias Winter, author of Language Matters, a space for reflection on language, power, and decline. Thanks for reading Language Matters. Subscribe for free to receive new posts and support my work.